Wow, what a turnout. Great to see so many people here today. So I'm going to ramble on a little bit about what security means to me. I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a high-level view of my world that I live in and what it means for you as an organization. I'm going to pose a few questions as I go, and I'm not necessarily going to answer all those questions. The reason being, some of them are for you to take back with you and ask of your own departments. And also some you might want to ask of the panel when they come up here as well. So as Simon mentioned, I'm currently in the role of Head of Cybersecurity across the AMAP region for Vodafone. And what's the AMAP region cover? Well, it covers markets like South Africa, Tanzania, Lesotho, Mozambique, the DRC, Qatar, Egypt, India, and of course Australia and New Zealand, to name a few. So when you think about it, across all those different markets, there's a whole range of geopolitical environments that I'm operating in, and therefore a whole range of different threats that we begin to see across those markets. So I can leverage a lot of that experience when I start to think about why security is so important in an organization, and particularly what you need to focus on going forward. Because when we think about it, there's kind of this utopia that we're all aiming towards. We've got a digital economy that we want to have. We want businesses to thrive. It's a perfect world that we want to strive to get to. But between us and this perfect world is like a field of uncertainty that we need to navigate. And this is where we need support from security to get through that field. But when I talk to organizations, you always hear the same thing. People talk about how security is hard. If you ask a security engineer about their job, they'll just say it's hard. Security is really, really hard to do. But why is it so hard? Because effectively, at the end of the day, security is just like engineering in some ways. And with engineering, you've got principles that you can follow. So why is security so different to other engineering traits? Like, for example, building a bridge. You know, when you build a bridge, they don't usually fall down because they follow foundations. They follow standard principles that have been built up over time to be able to create a structure that's going to last for a long period. When you build a network, it's the same. If you were to create a network to get packets from one part of the network to another, there are some engineering principles that we can follow, and they don't usually change that much. You know how to build entropy, or you know how to allow for entropy, you know how to allow for network resilience, planning for the fact that hardware sometimes fails, it's not always that reliable. So shouldn't security be the same thing? Shouldn't we have principles that we can build on? Well, we do. But we operate in a slightly different landscape than the people who build bridges or the people who create networks, because our evolving threats are changing so dramatically and so quickly. So let's take a look at that from a bridge builder's point of view. Let's just say we're going to build a bridge in the security world. So we're going to build a standard foundation. We're going to follow the principles of engineering to create a bridge. That's all well and good. But as we're constructing our bridge, we suddenly find out that someone's going to try and destroy our bridge. And they're going to do it by climbing along the spans and planting bombs or something like that. So we'll put some walls up to protect the bridge, to stop them getting along the spans. Then we discover that they're going to use a submarine, and they're going to try and take down the support struts of the bridge. So again, we could put in our own submarine to detect their submarine, or we could put in some sonar buoys to listen out for their submarine. And then we discover that they're now going to use a plane, and they're going to drop bombs on our bridge. So we could drop some anti-aircraft guns on the bridge, throw in a couple of missile launchers because they look cool. Always look good in a James Bond movie. But now, our threat actor has decided to do something different. They're just going to drive a car on the bridge full of explosives and set it off. So now we have to suddenly put in some barriers, some gates to protect the bridge, to actually check as cars coming on. And maybe throw in a couple of tanks just to intimidate people driving over the bridge so that they keep going. And then our threat actor decides to get really smart. They're going to launch a rocket into space, attach it to an asteroid, and throw that at the bridge. Yeah, not much I can do there. Oh, I could call Bruce Willis. He's good at this sort of thing. When I say that, I know half of the audience are probably going, yeah, Armageddon, good reference. The other half are going, what? Why would you call Bruce Willis? And there's probably a group going, who's Bruce Willis? So use Google. But this is the world the security engineer's living in. We live in a world that's constantly changing. Our threats are evolving, not necessarily year by year, but month by month. So we can't rely on foundations that are set in principle to build our bridge. We've got to look at what's happening in the landscape around us on a regular basis. We have these things called threats, which I've been dealing with just before, and we have our mitigations. Now, mitigations don't necessarily have to be technology-based as well. They don't have to be a box with flashing lights that you drop into your network. They could be mitigations relying around policy, procedures that you have. They could be people-related in terms of user awareness, don't click on links and emails, things like that. They don't always have to be technology-driven. But what we're also seeing is an evolution that occurs. When the threats happen, they tend to escalate in an evolutionary process. And we see that we have to defend ourselves through this evolutionary process as well. Think about antivirus. A few years ago, it was just antivirus. You just stuck antivirus on your computer. Then it moved to anti-malware. Then it became advanced threat protection. Now it's known as something as EDR, endpoint detect and response. So we're evolving the tools that we're using, but on the other side of the camp, they're also evolving the tools they're using. 10 years ago, there used to be a tool out there that if you wanted to take down a company, you'd use a tool called the low-orbit ion cannon to launch a denial-of-service attack against an organization. That then evolved into the high-orbit ion cannon, which became the geosynchronous ion cannon, which then evolved into effectively a cloud service. So now you can buy, as a service, denial-of-service attack off the cloud, complete with a service desk and support staff, should your denial-of-service attack not be working the way you want it to. So this evolution is occurring not just on our side, in terms of the way we protect our networks, but also on the side of the people wanting to break into our networks. The other thing that's occurring here is that we see an escalation going on. It's like an arms race. There's this cyber equivalent of an arms race that's occurring. As we build our defenses up, people are finding better ways to get through them. And effectively, that cyber arms race is continuing to grow and grow and grow, until we reach the point where we end up with MAD, mutually assured destruction. We're going to reach the nuclear equivalent in the cyber world. What's the nuclear equivalent in the cyber world look like? Well, it's effectively turning off the internet. That's your effective nuclear button that occurs out there. Now, unlike the physical world equivalent of mutually assured destruction, which is actually an official strategic term, it's hard to believe, but yes, it's actually a strategic term that you build up big enough weapons that everyone's too scared to use them. But in the cyber world, the nuclear button has been pressed more often than you might think. In 2011, in Egypt, during the riots, the government shut off the internet. The country went dead, effectively went black to the rest of the world. And that was to prevent rioters from getting access to social media to be able to communicate and plan their next lot of riots. And as we look at stats around the last few years, a few countries have actually pressed this internet button, this nuclear button, more times than you might think. India, for example, has done it 154 times over the last few years. So, mutually assured destruction does exist. So, we have an evolving landscape, we have evolving threats that are going on. Security also needs to evolve to keep up with that, not just necessarily with the tools we're using, but the way we're perceived and the way we operate within business. Traditionally, security was always considered to be a protector. We sit there and we protect data. We protect the business from threats. We do a protection role. And that's kind of a back office function, usually associated with padlocks and presentations, which I really hate, and also with security guards, because that's kind of the physical equivalent that most people can relate to. But when you're in this back office function, you're not really affecting the business too much. Sometimes you can be seen to be a roadblock to the organization. Padlocks themselves, although they lock things up, it makes it difficult to get access to them when you really need to sometimes, finding the right keys to get in. If you think about security in terms of a consumer world, it's more around safety that people think about. How do we make safe environments? How do we create a world that's safe for curious young minds to grow in? How do we make sure our economy is safe that people can transact online? So it's a more emotive stance when we talk about it in the consumer space. My view is that security needs to move away from being just a protector, and we need to move towards being a guide in an organization. We need to guide the business. Remember, we had that utopia we want to reach, and we have that landscape we need to get across to reach that utopia. Security is there to guide the business across that landscape. We're there to make it possible to reach that end state that the organization wants. It's an enabler, not a back office function. It needs to work with the executive, the CEO, the board of directors. Security needs to be visible across the whole organization. And it's not just the role of a security department to do that. It's the role of everyone in the business to make sure that security is part of the DNA of an organization. But there's another way that security needs to evolve as well. We need to evolve in the way we approach our strategies and how we manage security. Traditionally, when you look at security, it's always been considered like a siege mentality. We develop our strategies around protecting information in one location, building walls around it, firewalls and things like that. And whenever you see presentations on security, they're normally attached to castles or something physical, some barrier that we put in place to prevent people from getting access to our data. And this worked a few years ago, because typically you would go to work and you would sit at a computer in the office, connected to a corporate network with your servers, and that would be it. You wouldn't take anything away from the organization. But we live in a different world now. Our data has gone feral. It's no longer in data centers within our networks protected by these barriers. It's sitting out on mobile devices, on tablets, on cell phones, on watches even. Our information has spread well beyond the organization. So we need to rethink the strategies we take and how we protect ourselves and how we protect our data and how we guide the business going forward. In my view, we need to move away from a siege mentality and more towards what we call submarine warfare, where we start hunting for threats within our organization, actively looking for where the risks are. We still need walls, don't get me wrong, walls still are important. Firewalls, don't go off and turn off all your firewalls saying, it's useless, Colin said so, we're not going to use them anymore. No, firewalls are still important, but security needs to evolve beyond that walled mentality. We need to start thinking about how do we protect the information, and not necessarily on the devices it sits on, because you can build controls around the devices as well. So you can have encryption on your tablets, you can have encrypted hard drive on laptops, you can make it harder to get access to the data if you have access to the device physically. Because we all know it's going to happen. Someone's going to leave their laptop on a bar or in a taxi or something like that. So you can protect that. But what happens when the information leaves those devices? It gets emailed to a Gmail account, it gets just put into a Dropbox somewhere, or it even goes to a legitimate third-party supplier. How do we ensure that you've got controls built in around the information itself so that no matter where it sits, you have the assurance that it's actually protected? That's where we need to focus our efforts. Because at the end of the day, accidental leakage of information will always occur. You can't 100% prevent the human factor from occurring within an organization. Someone's going to email something to the wrong person one day. You just got to make sure it's impossible for that person to open the file that they're not supposed to have access to. So as security is evolving, in terms of the way we need to approach our strategy, we also need to look at what the rest of the world is doing. And technology is evolving around us. That's what's driving this change for us. 10 years ago, mobile devices weren't that popular. They didn't have the ability to store all your information on them. Now technology has driven us to a point where it is that way. We need to look at what else technology is doing to us and how that can be used either to protect ourselves, but also how it could be used against us. Security is always kind of a double-edged sword in that way. It's great that there's new technologies out there, but someone's thinking up smart ways to use them against us as well. Think about computing power for a start. If you were to buy a computer today and compare it to a computer 10 years ago, it's going to be around about 120 times faster than that computer 10 years ago, based on the way computing has grown over the years. If you were to buy a computer in 10 years' time, based on Moore's law's calculations, that computer should be the equivalent of 16,000 times faster than the one from 10 years ago. So if computing is taking off with an exponential rate, what does that mean from a security point of view in terms of encryption? A computer in 10 years' time could potentially breach encryption algorithms that you've got in play today. We need to evolve as that technology is evolving. Quantum computing is forcing that path as well. Quantum computers don't technically exist now, although apparently lots of universities claim they've got working models, but there's already conversations going on around what does encryption look like in a quantum computing world. So NIST has released standards on that already. And then we have to think about other things, Internet of Things in particular. We suddenly have all these devices in our houses. We have devices in our networks that we don't even know about that are connected to the internet in some cases. So we need to start thinking about not only what are those devices doing, but how do we protect ourselves against them? Think about your house. I'm sure some of you might have the odd smart light bulb in your house, maybe a smart TV. Someone may even have a smart fridge. There's toasters coming. There's all sorts that you can get connected. And these devices are all designed to talk to one another, talk to the internet without you even knowing. The ultimate world, the fridge will go and order milk for you when it detects that milk's getting too low, things like that. But how do you know what those devices are doing? Because when you sit at home, you can turn on the light and you can see it's working. You can change the color of it if it's a flash light bulb. You don't necessarily know at the same time it's doing a denial of service attack against Kmart or something like that without you knowing. So we're seeing evidence of this occurring. The Mirai botnet, for example, was the first real evidence of an Internet of Things denial of service attack. There's also evidence out there now that you could be using smart TVs in a bad way. So CryptoLocker, which is a very famous way of holding businesses to ransom, they've found ways now where you could effectively crypto-lock a TV. So you could prevent people from getting access to the television until they pay a fine over Bitcoin. So, like I say, the technologies are there, but people are finding interesting ways of using them against us. We're also seeing this big growth in terms of the way we communicate. So think about what's coming on the horizon with 5G, increased network speeds, decreased latency. Imagine what a world would look like where instead of having maybe 40 or 100 meg to the phone, you can get a gigabit to the phone or to any mobile device. Sounds really good for downloading those movies, but it can also be used against you as well. So we need to evolve ourselves as the technology is changing around us. The city of Atlanta is a perfect example of this. They decided they wanted to be one of the world's first smart cities. So they invested a lot of money in actually trying to put in smart infrastructure across the city. And this is one of the news headlines that came out, making a big proclamation to the world, look at us, we're so wonderful. The next news headline that followed, Atlanta got hacked. They were held to ransom by a CryptoLocker variant. Effectively, all the city's data was locked up and they couldn't get access to it. So you've got to be careful about what statements you make out there. But like I say, they're getting smarter. You know, who would have thought sprinklers could be used against us? But smart sprinklers could actually become an attack mechanism. Because if you think about it, if you had, in the height of summer, where you've got low water reservoirs, and someone worked out how to turn on all the sprinklers in the city, they could effectively drain the water supply, therefore holding the town ransom. So people are finding interesting ways to use these smart devices against us. Also, it creates kind of a new form of attack that we're seeing called a supply chain attack, where you're not necessarily going to be hacked through your network, but through devices attached to your network. Who would have thought a fish tank could be used to attack you? Well, it happened to a casino. An internet-connected thermometer through the fish tank, which was connected to the corporate network to get internet access, was used to actually breach the corporate network of the casino. Supply chain attacks are becoming more commonplace. Target got targeted, funnily enough, by using air conditioning units that were attached to the internet, again through the corporate network. So they didn't come into Target directly, they went through a third-party supplier that was providing data to them, or equipment for them. And these attacks aren't always just monetary driven. Target also got attacked once through its phone system, where the attackers decided to get access to the PA network inside the stores and broadcast some rather inappropriate content across the PA system, which caused a huge embarrassment. So sometimes these aren't necessarily technology driven. So what does it mean for you? This kind of looks like doom and gloom. There's all this nasty stuff going on out there. Well, there are some simple things that we need to do. We just need to think about the basics and how we secure our organizations. In some ways, you just need to be more secure than the person next to you. It's like the old scenario of two photographers photographing lions in the African plains, and one of them's got running shoes on and the other one's wearing boots. You just have to run faster than the lion's next meal. So in the security world, you just need to get the basics right within your organization, so you become a little bit too hard, then they move on to someone who's a softer target. What are those basics? Well, firstly, you need to know your data. Know your assets, because it's hard to secure your assets if you don't know what they are. And information is an asset. Don't think it's not. It's actually a key asset of your business. Customer data is just as important as the servers it's sitting on. So know your information, know your data, know your assets, so you can actually begin to secure them. Patching is a key one. Most of the attacks that occur usually occur through vulnerabilities that are already well known. People just haven't patched for them yet. So make sure your infrastructure is up to date with its patching. Have policies in place, particularly user acceptance or user access policies, so that your staff know the rules and what they should be doing. And have password procedures in place. Don't share passwords. All the basics that you keep hearing about. Have strong, long passwords, all those things. Two-factor authentication. They're all the basics, but if we get them right, it just makes you a little bit more of a harder target. But the last thing I want to cover is really the most important thing, Because we spend so much time focused on preparing ourselves, putting these defenses in place, putting these protections up. But we don't think about the next two stages that are just as important, because that's before the attack. What happens during an attack, and what happens after an attack? Because during an attack is the key. That's where your business will survive or fail miserably, how you handle the procedure of an attack. Be prepared for it. Make sure your executives in particular are prepared for it. I've seen plenty of examples where a CEO has been in front of the media during a cyber attack looking like a possum in the headlights. What message does that send to your customers? Make sure that you're prepared for that incident. Make sure your staff are prepared as well. And then after the attack, what happens? What's your recovery plan? How are you going to win back the trust of your customers? Have you got cyber insurance? If you do, what are the actual points to trigger it? So make sure you're prepared for not just for before the attack, but during the attack and after the attack. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be all doom and gloom. That cyber utopia does exist. We will eventually get there, but we need to work together to get there. Security needs to move out of the back office, become a front office function, working alongside the business and guiding it towards the end. So thank you very much.